Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
It is the mother of all talk shows every Friday night, not least because the march of events is so momentous. You can hardly look at the latest news flash without being startled, surprised, shocked, perhaps even very afraid. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours.
Big Georgie Galloway's back on the radio!
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio.
I was at the Latitude Festival with my friend Keith Allen in Suffolk last night. I was on at 12 o'clock midnight, and just before I took the stage, I got the news about what was happening on the boulevard, on the seafront, the Corniche in Nice, a very beautiful south of France Riviera town. Well, you know, we get used to such shocks, but this utterly banal mass murder of people by a truck was really something new. We've gotten used to car bombs. We've gotten used to mass shootings. We've gotten used to suicide bombers. We've gotten used to all the paraphernalia of terrorist warfare, but we never had almost 100 people now likely to have been murdered by a truck. Let me get some things straight and put some things out there for us to think and even argue about. If this act of murder, most foul, was carried out in pursuit of the mindset and the goals of the death cult that is ISIS, Al-Qaeda, then it is yet another example of that death cult's utter disregard for anything that is human. This death cult has now killed, directly and indirectly, hundreds of thousands of people, and most of them have been Muslims, by the way. So when you hear them say that they're carrying out these acts of murder in the name of Islam, remember that point first and foremost. The vast majority of the hundreds of thousands of people whose lives they have taken or caused to be taken were Muslims. Secondly, if it turns out that this latest mass murderer was motivated by this Al-Qaeda ISIS mindset, we're going to have to up our game in Europe. It is, I hope, without any need to say, that I bow my head in grief and condolence at the suffering that has been caused as a result of this murderous terrorist outrage. On that, all politicians and pundits surely agree. But I would be derelict in my duty if I did not speak what I believe to be the truth to you about where we stand now. Let me start with the practical. It is frankly unbelievable that in the midst of an official state of emergency, that this giant truck was allowed to proceed along the Corniche when scores of thousands of people in a huge crowd were celebrating Bastille Day. If a state of emergency doesn't mean that a gigantic truck headed towards such a crowd of people doesn't deserve being flagged down and checked, then it's some strange kind of state of emergency to me. And if it had been stopped and checked, and I'm told by my colleagues at Talk Radio that it actually was stopped and waved on, then this is criminal negligence, criminal irresponsibility, and makes a mockery of the idea that France was involved and had declared a state of emergency. Heaven help us if that's the kind of level of security during a state of emergency. I'll come later to where we stand in Britain. Let me stay with France for the moment. The President of France, let's make an allowance that he was, like everyone, in a state of shock at what had just happened, made several giant political errors, as has his Prime Minister Cazeneuve later. Cazeneuve, the Prime Minister, says we have to get used to living amidst terrorism. No, we don't. No, we won't. No, we won't accept it. We demand from our state that we pay for proper protection, proper intelligence, instead of the kind of farce that was the security in Nice last evening. But Hollande's errors are more grave. First of all, unbelievably, he described what happened as an example of Islamic terrorism. President Hollande, there is no such thing as Islamic terrorism. That is an oxymoron, any more than any atrocity by the continuity IRA could be described as Catholic terrorism. Someone who carries out such acts of terrorism cannot be a Catholic, cannot be a Muslim. This man appears to, on the face of it, have been motivated by the mindset of the death cult of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who follow a Wahhabist, Takfiri, fanatic, fringe of Islamic interpretation. And that's how it should be treated. And by the way, it's about time we started asking questions of our best friends in Saudi Arabia, who are the theological, ideological, and financial fountainhead of this entire phenomenon. And what was President Hollande's plan to protect France better in the future? He's going to do more bombing in Syria and Iraq. Well, that's been going well, hasn't it? We need better intelligence, better security, and we need a better foreign policy. We need to shoot down dead any terrorist who comes in our midst and shoot them down dead efficiently and quickly. We need more protection and more security for our people. And we've got to stop imagining that we make the world safer by invading and occupying and bombing other people's countries. Have we learned nothing? It used to be said of the French royals, the Bourbons, that they had learned nothing and forgotten nothing. And all of us are now ruled by people who have learnt nothing. Nothing from Iraq, which we've repeated in Libya and in Syria and in Yemen. We've learned nothing from the past near 15 years of carnage that has cascaded, spilled all over the world. I've run out of time for this particular oration. I will later in the program talk about the danger of all of this coming here to London, to Britain, which is real and present.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
You need to call me. It's 0844 499 1000. Call me if you want to join in this great debate, which will, I promise you, proceed over the next 3 hours on the mother of all talk shows. Now, our first guest is one of the smartest and most articulate spokespersons for the Muslim community in Britain. 2 million people, of course, of the Muslim faith living in Britain. The great majority of them now actually born here and as British as you or I. His name is Raza Nadeem, and he's campaigns coordinator and spokesperson for the Muslim advocacy group MPAC, MPAC UK, and he joins me now. Raza, let me start, if I may, by asking a question that is troubling me. This person, like the people who carried out the mass murder in Paris just a few months ago, is a strange kind of Muslim. He habitually wore shorts, he drank alcohol, he was a petty criminal, he had been a drug user. Why is it that the people who emerged to carry out these acts of mass murder are so untypical of anything that you could describe as Muslim?
Well, see, this is a big part of what. First of all, thank you for having me on, George. And I think it's a big part of what many people have been saying, that actually to just say it's to do with Islam is to ignore the facts of this. I mean, I've just been reading up about the Nice attack and how, the French authorities are actually looking to understand the motive of this individual, because it doesn't seem to fall into the normal thing of, well, it's not been claimed by ISIS, it's not been claimed by any group. So what made this person commit this act? And he seems to have a petty criminal record from beforehand. He's spoken of as being a violent individual, drunken individual who's committed, just has been a nuisance in society. And I think that's what's annoying in the whole thing, is that it's whenever such horrific attacks happen, when innocent lives are lost, you see often these racists who start kind of baying for blood and saying, it's all to do with Muslims, all to do with immigrants, we need to stop this now. And it's just, there's no adult conversation really taking place apart from in kind of these kind of talk shows. We're saying that what do we as a society, as a global community, address this problem? Because if you look at this individual who committed this horrific act, you're right, it just doesn't make sense how he's not kind of had any links to any groups. He wasn't on the radar of the French authorities with regards to counterterrorism or security. It was just on a criminal basis. So it does beg the question, which is what drove this person, and what research has shown. And this is something that needs much more investigation, in my opinion, is that the role of the criminal underclass in countries and how they get sucked into committing these kind of attacks or having links to ISIS or mental health haven't really been scrutinized well enough. And I think we just kind of fall for, well, it sounds like a Muslim name, sounds like an immigrant. There we go. That's it. No further investigation needed, lads.
That's absolutely correct. However, the president of France, no less, when he made his first statement last night, and I was startled when he said this, he didn't describe it as Islamist extremist terrorism. He didn't describe it as Islamist terrorism. He described it as Islamic terrorism, which was a very dreadful error, because it must lead to exactly the kind of alienation which is intense in France, very intense, the very pressure cooker which produces the kind of madness that we have seen. Now, my second point is this. If this mass murderer last night had been a non-Muslim, white man, we would now be discussing this as a mental health issue.
Yes.
But we are not discussing it as a mental health issue because he was not a non-Muslim. He was not white. Don't
No,
people see that this cycle of misrepresentation is producing the hatred, which is helping to produce the mutation of terrorism?
Oh, exactly, George. And the thing is this has been very well documented by people like Glenn Greenwald for The Intercept, who have actually written about how part of ISIS's goal is to eliminate the grey zone of coexistence. They don't want Muslims to feel like they belong in Europe or in the West. They don't want Westerners, non-Muslims, to think that Muslims belong in the West either. And when you see the way Francois Hollande spoke, with the way you see other politicians and think tanks and other individuals speak, they essentially play the role that ISIS want them to play, which is saying that there is no grey zone. We cannot exist together as citizens, regardless of our faith, our sexuality, or our gender, or whatever it may be. And I am concerned because even though Francois Hollande made those comments, which are deeply disturbing, he's still being attacked by right-wing politicians in the country who are saying you've not done enough, more needs to be done, and we're going to see a much more clamping down, much more draconian legislation pushed through, and the conversation lurches even more to the right and says, and it breeds more intolerance. And your second point about how, you're right, if this killer, this criminal, this murderer was a white non-Muslim, would we be talking about his mental health? I agree, you would be. Just look at the Joe Cox thing, how with Thomas Mayer, we haven't really scrutinized in the same manner as we will be scrutinizing this, which is who radicalized him, what was he linked to, etc. But apparently he was a lovely gardener, lovely to his mother, and had mental health issues. And for me, it's that, and this is what worries me is that for the reasonable person who watches the media coverage and the way our politicians talk about it, it further entrenches them in their reasonableness, which is they say, look, guys, this is not on the way we're talking about this. They can see the clear double standards. But the unreasonable people who are much more vocal and often have a role to play in governments, they're the ones that become more entrenched in their unreasonableness and say that, you know what, something must be done about these savages. And it just, and for me, it is worrying because the French Muslim community, I've got relatives there and I do talk to them regularly about this. I went to visit them regularly. You can see that they from a young age, a very young generation, already feel they do not belong to this country. And that the fact that you can eliminate that way of thinking for a young person that this is their country, this is their home, that really paves the way for people to go down a really dark road.
Indeed, and some do. Let's work on the assumption, it's certainly mine, that this person had little or nothing to do with Islam. And I think there are unanswered questions about the Paris attackers and their Belgium connections, their brothel creeping, alcohol-riddled, drug-taking, and so on, none of which have anything to do with being a Muslim. But let's leave that aside for a minute. You and I both know that there are extremist Muslims. There are. I've met them. You must have. I have heard them. I have read them. There are extremist Muslims who are like sirens on the rocks, seeking to lure young, impressionable Muslims to their perspective of separatism, extremism, and violence. Do you think the state is heading this off, or do you think the state, advertently or inadvertently, is actually making the recruitment of these people more easy?
Well, I've often said that when I look at people like the former Prime Minister David Cameron and the now Prime Minister Theresa May, they have been individuals, in my opinion, who have been great recruiting sergeants for ISIS in the way they talk down to Muslims, in the way they say that, you've got to you've got to sort yourselves out. This is on you. This is your problem. That kind of language, that kind of rhetoric, it helps no one. And I've spoken to young Muslims who feel they have no stake in the society, and those are the key elements of what makes an individual say, I do not belong, or I do not want to belong, or I do not want this nation or these people to exist or live in peace. And it's been numerous academics and others have highlighted this and spoken to people that have gone to fight with ISIS and returned disenfranchised because they realized they were conned. And what they will tell you that the key elements that drive people that way is a serious sense of alienation, being marginalized in society. And then what happens is when it's having that contract between citizen and state broken. When they feel they no longer have a stake in our society, then what is it that would ever keep them here, that would make them care about the security or safety of the nation that they live in or are often born in? And then you have ISIS on the other side saying that, you know what, we're going to treat you with respect, we're going to treat you like kings, and you're going to be great warriors, and we're going to have a revolution. And that bravado and that whole thing together creates an environment where it's a pull for a young person, that our politicians, the way they talk to young Muslims, they essentially push them away and often into the arms of ISIS.
Raza Nadim, thank you very much for joining us, spokesman of MPAC, MPAC UK, one of the main Muslim organisations in Britain. Thanks very much for that. Now, coming up later in the programme, we'll be looking at a different kind of fighting, but nonetheless a very bitter form of civil war going on in the Labour Party, including the controversy with the Brighton and Hove branch. 6,000 members just been suspended. It's a kind of martial law. And also Ian Lee is up after me at 10 p.m. tonight, and tomorrow morning from 8, Penny Smith's Saturday breakfast show features the woman who owes her son's freedom to Theresa May, and a guy who injects snake venom into himself. This alongside all the usual fun, including our book club, life hacks, and how to do a proper barbecue with our top chef, Barry Vera. That's all tomorrow from 8 a.m. only on Talk Radio.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
Now, if you want to join in, it's 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. We'll call you back. And you can text TALK plus your message to 87222. You can tweet me, of course, at George Galloway, or tweet at Talk Radio. A very considerable expert on terrorism and international security joins me next. He's Dr. Jonathan Leader Maynard from the prestigious University of Oxford. Dr. Jonathan, thanks very much for coming on the show.
No problem.
I just saw on the television there that the French Prime Minister says there were no security failings in the situation in Nice last night. I find that very difficult to believe. Where do you stand on that, first of all?
Yeah, I find it a bit difficult to believe as well. I mean, I think one of the very important things that I have to say at this stage is, of course, we still know very little at the moment. So it's very hard to make determinate statements one way or the other. But I certainly think one of the things that already the French government is under scrutiny for is, this is a government that's in a state of emergency, supposedly.
Yes.
Which is meant to, empower them to give a wide range of government powers to prevent terrorist attacks. Clearly, this made no difference in this case. And certainly, I think there are questions to be asked over, there was meant to be a security cordon around Bastille Day events in Nice, quite how that was breached. How a person completely unauthorized with a lorry was allowed to drive through and cause such damage is an important question. It's very hard to say at this stage what potential failings there may have been by French security services, or if they were definitely to blame. But I certainly share your question mark around that statement, that confident statement so early on in the day.
Yes, I mean, no one can, Simon Jenkins in The Guardian today very properly pointing out that no state at all can legislate against a madman with a motor vehicle driving at people. But in a state of emergency, when, as you say, the state has given itself extra powers, never mind ordinarily, an event attended by tens of thousands of people, so emblematic of the French Republic as the Bastille Day celebrations, either that truck should have been stopped before it got onto the thoroughfare, or it should have been checked. Now, I hear, I can't confirm it, and you're right to say there's a lot yet we don't know, but I hear that he was stopped, and he said that he was carrying ice cream, and he was waved on. Now, either way, either he wasn't stopped or he was stopped and waved on. It just seems incredible to me that vehicle could have been filled with explosives, and we could have been talking about the death of thousands of people tonight. How can that be a non-security failure?
And I think, one of the important things, I think, from a security analysis perspective on this attack is it really re-emphasizes there are kind of two very different kind of terrorist attacks that tend to go on at the moment. There's those which seem to be primarily quite sophisticated, organized by a network, often linked to an organization like Islamic State or Daesh or whatever we want to call them, or Al-Qaeda. That tend to be quite ideologically motivated by highly radicalized individuals. And then there's a very different kind of attack, which tends to be by a loner, an individual, often not very ideologically or religiously motivated. I mean, it's interesting how quickly people have been worrying about the position of Islam in French society. I mean, by all accounts, from what limited information we have about Mohamed Larouche Bailel, the attacker, he was not a particularly religious man at all. So, and I think part of the problem here is that the security lens continuously fluctuates from one of these attacks to the other. So when we think about the kind of Paris attacks, we think about, this is intelligence failings, it's about our failure to predict and track at a highly sophisticated intelligence transnational level this sort of very, very sophisticated attack. And that can blind us to actually what is often a much simpler problem, which is very basic security around a public event that can allow an individual with very simple resources, a knife or a single gun or weapon or a truck or whatever, to do a lot of damage. And I think part of the real challenge for security services is integrating their response to these two very different kinds of threats, the highly sophisticated coordinated attack and actually the fairly simple non-intelligence, non-highly organized, very planned attack that actually needs kind of a very, very different, much simpler and more kind of on-the-ground competence in order to repel it and protect the public.
Now, if this were, God forbid, to happen in England, in Britain, in London, perhaps the most likely, how prepared are we to deal with it? I have today been at Heathrow Airport. I have driven past Buckingham Palace. I've driven past Parliament. I've been in a TV studio right next door to MI5 and right across the river from MI6. I don't myself see any signs of the fact that our threat level is officially severe, i.e., a terrorist attack is highly likely. I don't have a lot of confidence that we could stop something like this or bring it quickly to an end, which is the next best thing. What about you?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to this distinction between sort of two kinds of threats and two kinds of response. I think what tends to happen when we're on a high level of security alert is a lot of incredibly sophisticated efforts and resources are put into play on the kind of intelligence gathering side, the security services side, trying to track, in particular track through internet communications, potential terror plots worldwide. Yeah. I think we're very good at that kind of thing, and that's grown enormously in sophistication over the last few years. What I think this attack really reminds us of is that that's not necessarily enough to really deal with the problem. And actually, the kind of proposals that governments often suggest to us, big infringements of sort of civil liberties, new surveillance powers, and so on and so forth, may be less important than just how do we protect public spaces? Yeah. How do we set up barricades in the right areas? What kind of security checks do we use surrounding an event like Glastonbury, for example? And the irony is that actually those are probably the kind of policies that are much less controversial. I think the vast majority of people in Britain and elsewhere feel like, trading off very important civil liberties and giving the state a lot of surveillance power to protect us against terrorism, that's kind of controversial and difficult and a real dilemma. But actually, a bit of inconvenience in order to protect public spaces isn't so controversial. Most of us would be willing to trade that for more security. So I think that's going to be, as we're increasingly seeing these kind of low-level, loner, unsophisticated attacks going on, thinking about the nature of the response on that side is important. I would still broadly say that it is something I think we do well. I think it's very important that we keep these kind of attacks in proportion. This is a terribly tragic event, but our societies are amongst the most, very most safe societies in the world. The vast majority of terrorist death and violence that goes around in the world is not in Europe. It's not in North America. It's in countries like Iraq and Syria and Nigeria and Afghanistan that are really bearing the brunt of terrorist violence. So we are remarkably safe by comparison. But certainly every single time an attack like this goes on, we need to learn a lot of lessons.
Indeed. let's assume that we have leaders who are not good at learning lessons. I know it's quite far-fetched as an idea, but let's assume it. President Hollande effectively said that France will now become more deeply involved in foreign wars in Arab countries, in Muslim countries. Is that likely to work better in the future than it has in the recent past?
I think it's very hard to give a sort of overall answer to that question. I mean, the Western military involvement in foreign countries has been a phenomenally mixed bag, in my view. I mean, there have been complete catastrophes. I mean, it's very hard to say that a huge quantity of the modern terrorist threat we face, doesn't derive from the immense catastrophe of the invasion of Iraq, which I think almost all security analysts would see as deeply at root for all of these problems, a complete catastrophe. On the other hand, there is some evidence, we need to be, again, very cautious about this, but there is some evidence that that ISIS or Daesh, or whatever we choose to call them, have been in a position to cause incredible violence in the Middle East and promote violence globally, and that they are beginning to be pushed back. They are beginning to lose territory, to shrink in size, to shrink in power. So it's hard to give a sweeping statement. I mean, we do an awful lot wrong in foreign policy, and occasionally, in my view, we do a few things right. But certainly in terms of an attack like this, I mean, it looks like Lahouaj Bailel was not particularly linked to any organized network. These kind of individuals who, whether it's through ideological radicalization or personal life dysfunctionality, decide to resort to violence, that's the kind of threat that certainly no foreign policy is going to be able to deal with that effectively, either not intervening or intervening. I just don't think these kind of individuals are particularly moved by that kind of question. So this is really, I think, the kind of threat which requires, as I say, the more mundane responses, really. But, I mean, often the mundane responses are actually the most powerful ones.
Indeed. Dr. Jonathan Leader-Maynard, thanks very much for joining us, an expert in terrorism and international security from the University of Oxford.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
OK, I'm determined to make time for callers, and the number is 0844 499 1000. Just before I go to the first of the callers, a couple of the tweets. Well said, George. Need to get that message out there more, says Mohammed Arif. And Ibrar says, George, it has a lot to do with Islam, but only in the way it's a warped, twisted perversion of the faith. Well, that's often true, I think, Ibrar. I've very much got my doubts whether this particular mass murder had anything at all, even to do with that warped, twisted perversion of the faith. But time will tell. James Ball says, I've been to France. Armed police everywhere. How does a truck plough for 2 kilometres over children without being stopped? And James says, a truck could pull a house down. It takes a lot to stop one. Well, it takes a bullet through the windscreen to kill the murderer. And that's what should have happened within the first seconds of this crime being carried out. I stress this, and I have been doing this for a while. We need intelligence, better intelligence, though our intelligence seems to be doing a better job than some others. We need intelligence on these plots. But where there is no plot, but just some deranged madman, either acting for ideological or other reasons, including, like in Orlando, the darkest of self-hating reasons, then we have to be able to shoot these people down quickly, with no messing about. That's my point of view. Let's hear from Rashid, who's on a mobile somewhere. Rashid, where are you?
George, I'm in Birmingham. How are you doing?
By the grace of God, I'm good, and the better for hearing from you. Go ahead.
Yes, George, just wanted to say that these death cults and these individuals who follow this ideology, they have been talked about by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his scriptures, what he left behind, and he described them to a T. And it's kind of a prophecy that is happening, which unfortunately we have to go through this, but it doesn't mean to say that we have to sit by and let it happen. I mean, knowledge is the answer. knowledge is definitely the answer. But the other thing is, George, people need to understand these individuals, like the one in Orlando, and this guy seems to be like off-balance, drug-taking. I read a little article today, I don't know how true it is. Drug-taking individuals, wife-beating individuals, none-practicing their faith. And then they get this warped idea that the only way to redeem themselves from these sins is to kill themselves, basically.
That is a possibility, definitely. I mean, and some of those in the Paris attacks probably fit into that category. In other words, the fellow in Orlando, so far as we know now, had nothing at all to do with Islam and was acting for reasons of self-hatred. In the case of the Paris attacks, people who on the face of it had nothing to do with Islam had actually, in very short order, with accelerated rapidity, had become radicalized on exactly the basis you've just described. Let's redeem for all the sins by committing this horrific terrorist atrocity.
Just a definitely very, very shallow understanding of the faith. I've been a Muslim for 25 years, and Islam has done me such a great favor in my life. It's made me I think I'm a nice person, and I'd just like to say, thanks to God for guiding me to Islam. It's such a beautiful way of life. These people are destroying our image.
In this case it doesn't fit, though it did fit in the Paris case. Some of these people are returning to their own countries from a stint as jihadist fanatics in Syria and in Iraq, which, from my point of view, makes it even more of an outrage that Western governments did nothing, including the Turkish government that opened the door for them, did nothing to stop these people joining this jihad in the first place.
The Free Syrian Army, whether we agree with them or disagree with them, they were kind of dealing with them in the beginning, and then the West started to back them up, and then they pulled the plug on it, and this is the chaos that's happening.
Well, thank you very much, Rashid. Very interesting to hear from you. Remember, if you want to call me, the number is 0844 499 1000. Peter Thompson has tweeted, "A father of 3, divorced or not, mows down children with an articulated truck can only be an insane act." And Free Boy says, "True, this is on the cars. Cars in the next 20 years will all be driving electric cars. Oil is history." And Wayne Howard says, "George, ISIS are everything to do with Islam. It's radical Islam. It's 1400 years old." That's just bollocks, Wayne. Med Thays says, "And his actions never belong to Muslim. I'm a Muslim and I'm very sad for what happened to those people." Henry Brody says, "False. Anders Breivik and Timothy McVeigh were treated as terrorists." That's true, Henry, but they weren't treated as Christian terrorists. That was my point. They were treated as terrorists, yes, but they weren't. It was never claimed either that Jesus had any responsibility for their crimes, or that all the Christians in the world had any obligation to own them, to apologize for them, to soul search as to how their co-religionists could carry out such atrocities. Don't you see, Henry, that this double standard is, look, it's not just wrong, Henry, it's deepening the alienation and increasing the recruits of the actual extremists. You see, if a white non-Muslim commits even mass murder, it is never assumed that his religion has anything to do with it. And therefore, the co-religionists of that person are never made to feel rejected, unwanted, alienated, threatened in any way. And that's as it should be. But that's not the case, Henry, when a Muslim commits a crime. When a Muslim commits a crime, it is assumed by many, I'm inferring, including you. If my inference is wrong, I'm sorry about it. But it is necessarily, by some people, assumed that this is a Muslim problem, that somehow the Quran provides a basis for this, even though actually the Quran provides the absolute opposite of that. The Quran makes it clear that in times of war, Muslims are not even allowed to destroy trees, never mind innocent life, even in times of war. It is assumed by many, maybe including you, that somehow the Muslims at large have some kind of responsibility or obligation. But this is not the case in the Breivik and McVeigh cases. That's my point, Henry. Radwan is on the phone. Let's hear from him. Radwan, where are you?
I'm in Knightsbridge.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm your biggest fan, George. I met you when I was 16 in Brixton, and I've been your fan ever since.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. I'm a London cab driver, and I'm a Muslim as well, and I always get questions like, why are you guys terrorists and all this stuff, and I've always felt defensive when these things come up. And then now I got to the point where I don't see why I have to defend myself and for the crimes of other people. And, you know, the thing that you discussed, which is the reason why I like you, is what are the causes of these people? Because I was speaking to my mum today, and I said to her, why doesn't no one bomb Portugal or Malta or Bulgaria? Because they're not involved in other people's business. So no one wants to look at the causes behind all these things, and you're the only one who's discussing why these things are happening. And I do feel sorry for people in Paris, but people all around the world are dying, and there's no pleasant way of dying. You know,
there's 100 die every day in Syria and Iraq. 100.
That's what I'm saying. When if a bomb goes through your ceiling, and you know you're not gonna have a pleasant end. So although it's bad what happened there, people always forget what happens in other parts of the world.
Well, what we should do is have a single standard towards it. We should feel and deplore the suffering and the pain of the people everywhere the same. When I saw and hear what happened last night, children mown down in front of their parents, parents mown down in front of their children, people being mutilated by a giant articulated truck, it breaks my heart. I want to cry. And all of us feel that way. The problem is only some of us feel that way about the others elsewhere who are dying the same deaths in front of their children, in front of their parents. That's the point, isn't it, Radwan?
I agree with you 100%. And George, I want to quote you. You said that the people who flew the planes into the Twin Towers, they came from the toxic waters that was created by the Iraq War. So,
we just heard the professor from Oxford making clear that there is no security expert anywhere who any longer denies that the root of all of this was the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Yet Tony Blair told us with apparent sincerity just a few days ago, responding to the Chilcot report, that he had made the world a safer place. How's that for delusion, Radwan?
It's crazy, and the takeaway point is, you know, I hate these people, and you know, if I had the opportunity to fight them, I would. But the point is, you have to ask the right questions to the right people, and you know, if you're really sincere in stopping this, then you have to ask your government in whichever way you can, protest or in educating the people, what causes, you know, these attacks. And that's the, you know, ask yourself, why doesn't no one attack Poland? Because even though these people are crazy, there is a logic, there's a method behind the madness.
Okay, look, Radwan, thanks for talking to me. I've got to go.
A Across the UK, online and on DAB.
Talk Radio.
We have ways of making you talk.
Talk Radio.
It's the mother of all talk shows. Until 10 o'clock tonight, with me, George Galloway, talking about Nice, talking about Labour, talking about murder and mayhem.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Civil war and martial law in the Labour Party. We'll be talking to someone from the Brighton Labour Party. 6,000 strong. Now, doesn't exist. Suspended. And we'll be talking about Nice and the carnage on the Corniche.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Before we go any further, let's hear from President Obama.
Last 7.5 years in partnership with your countries, and so long as I have the privilege of being the President of the United States, I will continue to stand alongside you to promote those values all across the world. Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, President Obama was quick off the mark. He was actually a little more nuanced in his first statements than President Hollande was, and even more nuanced than the Cazeneuve, the Prime Minister of France, who made a statement that has angered many people in France and may actually lead to his resignation. I think we've got a clip to hear, have we?
Americans and French have stood together for 2 centuries, and I told President Hollande that we will stand united now in our grief, in our praying for the many who are injured, many of whom are still fighting for their lives.
That was President Obama speaking earlier, coming to the end of his presidential term, of course, and beginning to look and sound like it. Now, as I said, there is no political war like a political civil war, just like in real wars. A civil war is a very, very bloody affair. It is undoubtedly the case that the Labour Party is in perilous danger right now of splitting apart, of breaking up, because a small group of extremists have temporarily seized control of the Labour Party's headquarters and its National Executive Committee. And they are, many of them, almost half of them, tried to keep the leader of the Labour Party off the ballot in a re-election for the leader of the Labour Party. You know, just a few months ago, that would have just seemed such an outlandish idea that people would have laughed at it. But it nearly happened this week in the Labour Party's National Executive. They nearly kept the elected leader 10 months ago off the ballot. That has been triggered by a challenge by Angela Eagle so far, and maybe Owen Smith hereafter. And when the leader left the room, and 2 members of the National Executive, for overwhelming personal reasons, had to leave, they pushed through changes to the electorate that's going to choose the new leader of the Labour Party in the subsequent ballot, which can only be described as gerrymandering. In fact, gerrymander would be embarrassed by the brazen opportunism of that decision at the tail end of the National Executive this week. But it's gotten worse. They have now issued a list of words that if any Labour Party member uses, either verbally or on social media, they will be banned from voting. They have said that you can vote if you pay us £25. Bear in mind there's 600,000 members in the Labour Party now. It's the biggest Labour Party in the whole world. Such a failure that, Jeremy Corbyn, isn't he? And then, today, we learned that the Brighton Labour Party, surely the biggest in the country, with 6,000 members, has been suspended, and its officers frozen, not literally frozen, but have been placed in a state of suspended animation because, hey, they wanted to be loyal to their elected leader, Jeremy Corbyn. And one of them joins me now. He's Greg Hadfield. He was elected Secretary of Brighton and Hove Labour Party, but it's now in administrative suspension, and the vote that made him Secretary is annulled. Greg.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you. Just talk us through what the reasoning behind this is, would you?
There's no reasoning and no explanation. Saturday's annual meeting was a historic, remarkable example to anyone of how internal party democracy should be exercised. 600 people on a Saturday afternoon queued in the hall, out the stairs, out the front door, into the street, round the corner, and we had to have 3 sessions. I had to speak 3 times about why I was standing for Secretary and how and why I supported Jeremy Corbyn. There wasn't a single voice raised. There wasn't a single piece of abuse. There wasn't an argument. It was well organised, well chaired, and I've never been more excited in my life when I got 66% of the 606 votes voting for someone who said, Jeremy Corbyn is our leader, Jeremy Corbyn must stay our leader. 66%, the biggest party unit with the biggest turnout, with the biggest majority for candidates who supported Jeremy Corbyn. And weirdly, during and after, immediately, the smears that we've lived with nationally, the false fabricated allegations were on social media, including senior members of the Labour group on the council within Brighton and Hove, including the leader of the Labour group. And I was appalled when I heard immediately there were these allegations. And it seemed very weird, really, because it was perfect. So what was up? I think that we did do something really wrong, and I've got to confess that. 600 people out of 6,000 turned up and voted that they had faith and confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. And, of course, that's not allowed.
That's not allowed.
A week in politics is a long time. Well, in Labour politics in Brighton and Hove, 3 days is a long time. So 4 days after that, out of the blue, no communication with me as acting secretary, no complaints about any misbehaviour, no complaints about anything. We were suspended out of the blue.
And how did they communicate that to you?
There was a letter that arrived to my predecessor. I tried to speak to headquarters and regional office for 3 days, but they said they were a bit busy. Well, they should be in my seat. We were a bit busy, fending off smears and allegations that was leading to all sorts of wild rumours. But we have 600 witnesses. A letter arrived at 5:30. I was the 4th person in Brighton to have heard, I didn't receive it, that letter had arrived. I published it immediately online, and you can see it online. And 5 minutes later, I got a call from a journalist. How strange is that?
And what was your crime? Merely to be a supporter of the elected leader?
No, it was such an abusive and intimidating and bad behaviour, and there was spitting and all this stuff, apart from the 600 witnesses who were in the meeting. And I really wish that we'd filmed it. We've got photographs. We've got scores and scores of witnesses. But there are 2 incidents happened on Saturday. One was the one that the leader of the Labour group on Brighton and Hove City Council, Warren Morgan, malevolently, outrageously fabricated on Twitter and said that someone had been spat at and he was sorry about the abusive behaviour. Within hours, the individual who knew that, wasn't been named, who knew that he was the alleged culprit, and he's first time joiner to this sort of annual meeting. He's not an activist. He's one of the 6,000 grassroots members, a young man who self-identified himself to Warren Morgan and other councillors on the Sunday. But they kept repeating allegations, and he said, can't we just talk about it? Can't take them down? And no complaint going in. Repeated. And this young man, who I made contact with on the Sunday, his life has been turned upside down with not a single person making a formal complaint to me, nobody, even though they knew his name, getting in touch with him. I am ashamed of the fact that a young man is being victimized anonymously, cowardly, and nothing happened. There was no spitting. Now, at the same time that evening, a speaker who'd spoken next to me at a 750, 800-person rally, an Indian woman down from London, was abused in a pub. I won't say the language used. I have identified that person. He is a Labour Party member, or was, because he was in the annual meeting. The only person to boo, he booed me. The only person to make gestures, he made gestures whilst I was speaking. That's the only person. He went and swore in the most obscene way at an Indian colleague in a pub having a meal with a partner, with a friend, and the language was obscene. And 20 feet away around the corner, not involved in the incident, were some of the people who seemed to be having a very good time, according to a photograph that was published on social media, but didn't say anything about that incident on the Sunday. They dogpiled, I think the word is about Twitter, they dogpiled in on this young man who didn't do anything, and they didn't say anything about what is a reported hate crime now gone to the police. The young man now, yes, this morning, has made a formal complaint to the Labour General Secretary about how Warren Morgan's actions have brought the party into disrepute.
Well,
now,
let me stop you there, Greg, because I don't know who this person is. Neither do the listeners, and we're only hearing your side of the story on that. Let's go to the bigger picture.
Okay.
There's a coup going on, isn't there? The small group of extremists, mainly Blairite extremists, have seized control of the party headquarters and are prepared to destroy Labour in order to save it for Blairism.
I think something very subtle and clever has been going on for 10, 15 years in the post-Blairite era. And a generation of people, members of an organisation called Progress, almost a party within a party, some might say, funded by Lord Sainsbury, £3 million, the founder and funder of the SDP, until it collapsed finally in 1990. In the Blair government, the third longest serving government minister in the Blair government, and then now funding the Progress Party. There are many Progress members in senior positions in and around the Labour Party, and several in Brighton and Hove. But they only have 2,500 members, they say. After about 10, 15 years, they've spent £5 million, and they only have 2,500 members. But they seem to be disproportionately focused in the parliamentary chambers and council chambers. Now, it's not a coup. It's a cowardly plot that has failed. And finally, we now, 600,000 people, have the chance to say what they think who our lady should be. Jeremy Corbyn has been remarkable. People who have given him 24 hours to do the decent thing. Jeremy Corbyn has done the decent thing for 40 years. And if only he can be given time to look over his shoulder and see 600,000 people behind him supporting him, instead of 100 and something behind him trying to stab him in the back, then the Labour Party will win elections, specifically the one in East Brighton, with an excellent candidate that we have to win on August the 4th. And now 6,000 members are hobbled because they've suspended the party, and basically some people have trashed the reputation of the party. They've ruined the reputation of an individual, and they've suddenly fabricated allegations that somehow 600 people on a Saturday afternoon in the most marvellous environment were somehow thugs and abusive. And this has gone on for 6-9 months in the party nationally. This is the first time this has happened in Brighton and Hove. And really, we cannot allow it to happen. They have poisoned the well of politics in Britain.
I agree with that. Thank you very much indeed. That was Greg Hadfield, the elected secretary, 66% of the vote of the Brighton and Hove Labour Party, now in a state of suspended animation. What do you think? 0844 499 1000.
Controversial conversation and cutting-edge current affairs comment with the notorious B-I-G-G. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. Listen, this guy's a nightmare. He's not a great guy, folks.
0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Michael in West London has, and he's up next. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello again, George.
Hi.
Very glad to be on the show again. And I know you've got loads of people waiting, so I'll try and be quick.
Okay.
I think I'm going to have to get some fake identity so I can call in multiple times, because every time I try and call in, you guys are talking about so many different things. I'm spoiled for choice about what to talk about.
Yeah, well, it's a bewildering and tumultuous news agenda, no doubt.
Yeah. So I think it's most important that we talk about what's happened in France, because, I think the worst that would ever happen is if we became desensitized to this kind of stuff, and that's not to detract from the horrible attacks which happen across the Middle East regularly.
Oh, of course.
I don't mean to make light of it, but I was seeing that stuff coming through last night. It was like the guy. It's like on Grand Theft Auto where they drive line in a truck and just run people over on the road. It's literally like that kind of thing, and it's just really bad. So I don't mean to be. I'm trying to find the right words.
No, you're conveying your feelings very well.
Bastille Day, it's a shame it's hijacked because that's a real socialist kind of holiday. But moving on from that, the question that you asked earlier on, which I did make some notes about, was about how they managed to recruit these people who aren't really Muslims, and they don't come across in their profiling as Muslims afterwards. And just to tack it away from Islam specifically and more into religion generally, it occurred to me from like my Catholic upbringing that religion's full of, at least the Bible is full of recruitment from, marginalised, ostracised, weak, poor elements of society. The ones that I put in were Paul on the road to Damascus and Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute, and then we had lepers and tax collectors and Lazarus and all that kind of thing. And my point is that fanatics are always recruiting quote-unquote sinners and marginalised people into their ranks, and trying to tell them that
and they may have done in this case. It's just that we don't know it yet. They may have.
Of course,
done.
And how can we ever know?
Yeah,
there is a socialist angle to that. Not meaning to. I'm not trying to be opportunistic, but there is a socialist angle on that, and that is that as a society we have to look to improve the massive inequality in our country, and I know it's even worse in France.
It's even worse in France, yeah.
Entire communities which are like literally have become ghettos, and not because of necessarily from ethnic groupings, but more just because of huge differences in wealth inequality.
No, you're right. These banlieues, they're called, are effectively townships. They're like the townships that used to surround white South Africa in the apartheid era. Where do you stand on what's happening in the Labour Party, Michael?
Well, yeah. So, I don't necessarily want to be a drum beater because there's plenty of those around. I do support JC, and on the policy, really, it's not so much about is he a great leader. I don't want to be all one of these great leader type red book type things. I think he's got some great things to say, and I don't like what's the right word? The contradiction in terms. No, that's not even the right word either. Basically, the way that the PLP are saying he can't be a leader, and we don't support him because he's not a great leader, but therefore, at the same time, he's not a great leader because we don't support him. Where really, if they just
and they're putting up that great leader Angela Eagle against them.
Well, I saw her launch, and if you've all seen it, I'm sure some of your readers, your listeners have. It was just, it's embarrassing. The room was either excruciating. The room was either much too big, but she just looked really awkward. But
I don't know, public speaking's not easy at the best of times.
No, but if you're going to be a leader and you're campaigning that your leader that you've got isn't a good enough public speaker, you kind of have to be better than him. Michael, thanks for the call.
Just one thing before you go.
Yeah.
I think it's quite clear since that launch that the daily line we're going to get from the mainstream media is about abuse and intimidation. It's played out over the last couple of days, but it's been quiet since the incidents in France. If it's the case of what your friends from Brighton were saying, that this stuff didn't happen and it's all been fabricated, then what I was going to say is, of course, we will have to stop slagging these people off and using like really aggressive terminology. But at the same time, when things are put forward that there's been intimidation or abuse here, if we've not done it, then we have to stand up and say we've not done it and be able to document it.
Exactly.
And I think that's important.
I must press on. Thanks, Michael, for the call. Tarek is in Bradford. Go ahead, Tarek.
Hi, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Go ahead.
Great stuff. First of all, if I raise my voice, I do apologise. I'm just so angry at the moment. The atrocities in Paris, in Nice is absolutely appalling, and my thoughts and prayers go out to every single victim and family. Anyway, regarding the Labour Party, they've called Jeremy Corbyn a weak leader. That's the crack at the moment. He's a weak leader. He's unelectable, and this is what the media and the Blairites are putting out. And if I want to backtrack just to 2 seconds, it all started about the EU referendum, right? Now, the big hitters with the referendum were Michael Gove, Andrea Leadsom, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. As soon as that result came, they all dispersed. They all disappeared, and you didn't know where. The only person to grab the bull by the horn and say, we need to invoke Article 50 was Jeremy Corbyn. He was willing to grab it by the horn and say, well, let's sort it out now and take it forward, right? Now, what's the doing in the Labour Party and the Tory Party was in turmoil? They know that Jeremy Corbyn is electable, is going to win the general election, so they thought, let's start a riot, and that's exactly what they've done, and I just can't believe it. I just can't believe it. And the £25 charge and 6 months, if you join within 6 months, you can't vote. My sister joined the other week, a couple of weeks ago, and she was absolutely disgusted and that she can't vote, and not only that, has to pay an extra £25, Mr. Galloway. It's absolutely scandalous.
Well, it is. This is a PSYOP, a psychological operation, a black op, as they sometimes call it, to create chaos and then use the chaos as the argument that there has to be a change. It is...
Exactly, yeah.
That's exactly what's going on. And they have temporarily, I hope, control over the levers of power, over who can vote, what price they can vote, who can be suspended, who can be expelled, and so on. They've got that power for the moment. I hope after the Labour conference in September they will not. But in this next couple of months they have that power, and they hope to use that power to cheat the members of the Labour Party out of their leader, don't they?
Oh, I mean, this is it, you see. And I've just got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach when it comes to September and the leadership is over, that there's going to be some fix, and then all of a sudden Jeremy Corbyn lost. Prove to me that's not going to happen, Mr. Galloway.
Well, I wouldn't trust. I wouldn't trust this clique as far as I could throw them. I hope that independent assessors will be counting the votes. But of course, if you're in control of who's allowed to vote, then you are effectively rigging the ballot. And that's what the Labour National Executive Committee, Blairite cell are trying to do. They're trying to rig this election. I've got to go, Tarek. Thanks for calling. Coming up later in the programme, it's been a busy week in the political sphere, but we'll have a more light-hearted look at it with cartoonist Tim Sanders. And don't forget that Ian Lee is back at 10 p.m. tonight. And as I said earlier, tomorrow morning from 8, Penny Smith's Saturday Breakfast Show features the woman who owes her son's freedom to Theresa May, and a guy who injects snake venom into himself. This alongside all the usual fun, including our book club, life hacks, and how to do a proper barbecue with our top chef, Barry Vera. That's all coming from 8 a.m. tomorrow, only on Talk Radio.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
We're talking about Jeremy Corbyn, about the Labour coup that is underway. We're talking about the civil war in the Labour Party that is now raging. We're talking about the terrorist atrocity that murdered 84 people with a truck last night, and about 50 people are very seriously injured, many of them critical. It's very possible indeed that the death toll from this act in Nice last night will reach, three figures will reach 100. Now, let me read a couple of quick tweets. Galloway's talking rubbish, says the Bear, who I seem to recall is a supporter of apartheid South Africa. So we'll dispose quickly of that. Now, let me see if I can get one or two. Jeremy Corbyn, unelectable. Why? Because he doesn't wear hair gel? Is it all about image? What about principle and policy? Well, I don't know if he wears hair gel or not. I used to sit beside him for nearly 30 years in Parliament, but I never paid all that much attention to his hairdo. I was more interested in the fact that he was a good and honest man who's been true decade after decade, didn't sell his principles for advancement, cycled to work, cared nothing for the possibility of a ministerial Montego. Now, he had very few loyal supporters in the previous shadow cabinet. He has rather more now, I hope, and one of those who has been in both is the shadow Justice Minister, Richard Bergen, the MP for Leeds East. Richard, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. But the members are revolting. They're going to court. They're consulting lawyers. The Labour Party in Brighton, 6,000 strong, the biggest surely in the whole country, has been suspended. Have a group of madmen seized control of the Labour Party's headquarters, or what?
Well, what's happened in the last couple of weeks has been deeply disturbing. There are people in the Labour Party who didn't want a leadership election to take place whatsoever. First of all, they wanted to dispose of the elected leader of the Labour Party by pressurising him into resigning.
Bullying, really, Richard. I'd call it bullying.
There has been bullying going on, but the good news is that people like Jeremy Corbyn, people like John McDonnell, and others, including hundreds of thousands of members across the country, won't be bullied. But when that failed, the next step was, of course, to have a leadership election, but try to ensure that the members were robbed of their democratic and fair right to choose to vote for the current leader of the Labour Party in that election. And then since then, of course, we've had these very disturbing trends of removing people, removing their rights to vote, and also pricing people out of having their say in the upcoming leadership election. So profoundly worrying, profoundly anti-democratic, and it isn't good news for the Labour Party at all.
No, indeed, or for, more importantly, the millions of people who depend upon a Labour Party, who need a Labour Party, the working people who have no other means of defending themselves, the people who are now too old to work, the people who are too young already to have work, the disabled people, the marginalised, the people on the end of the lash of prejudice and bigotry, all of such people, which are many, many millions, tens of millions of people, need a Labour Party to stand up for them. And it's now in a state of absolute paralysis as a result of this coup. How's it going to end?
Well, I think that Labour MPs who initiated and organised this attempted coup need to take a good, long, hard look at the effect of what they've done. They've let the Conservatives off the hook. They've taken the Conservatives and the economic chaos they've caused off the front page of the newspaper, and have instead put a manufactured leadership row on the front page of the newspaper. But what's at stake now isn't just about who is the leader of the Labour Party going forward. What's at stake now is the kind of Labour Party that we have. Do we want to dispose of the anti-austerity politics and anti-austerity economics that Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell and others have espoused? Of course we don't, because the truth is that neoliberal economics, which has ruled the roost in this country, by and large, regardless of which political party has been in power since 1979, has failed working-class people and failed communities of length and breadth of Britain since 1979. So we need a Labour Party that will stand up to the economic and political establishment, and that, I'm afraid, is under threat at the moment.
Well, are we going to have that at the end of this, or are we going to have either some kind of coup which removes Corbyn by gerrymandering the electorate and cutting swathes out of Jeremy Corbyn's voting base in the Labour Party? Or, if Jeremy does win, are these people going to continue this from behind him in the House of Commons for another year and try again the next year? Or, third option, a third way you might call it, are these people going to break away, join up with the Liberal Democrats and the pro-EU Tories and form an SDP Mark II?
Well, I don't take any election for granted, either an election outside the Labour Party or an election inside the Labour Party. But what I have noticed from listening to members in my own constituency and elsewhere is that there's plenty of Labour members who didn't support Jeremy Corbyn in the last leadership election who are planning to support him now because their sense of fair play, their sense of fairness has been offended by the way the elected leader of the Labour Party has been treated. But going forward, no socialist or social democrats in the Labour Party, in the Parliamentary Labour Party, worthy of respect, would want to split the Labour Party. I think if the National Executive Committee had voted on Tuesday to exclude the elected leader of the Labour Party from the ballot paper, I think that would have precipitated a split of the Labour Party in the country. If Jeremy Corbyn wins, and I'll work as hard as I can, along with hundreds of thousands of others, to make sure he does, if he wins the leadership election, I hope that no Labour MPs would decide to leave the Labour Party. But that really is a matter for them, not a matter for me.
Well, let's look for a moment. We've only got a moment. Jeremy Corbyn has built the biggest Social Democrat or Labour Party in the world, up to 600,000 members. He has won every single election that has been put in front of him in the last 10 months, despite being surrounded by backstabbing plotters. He's won council elections, mayoral elections, parliamentary by-elections, in 3 out of 4 cases with substantially increased majorities. Labour is ahead of the Tories, despite all of this, in the opinion polls. It is pure psyops. It is a psychological operation that's underway to try and persuade people that Corbyn is some kind of failure. The opposite is true.
Well, I agree with your analysis of the electoral success we've enjoyed under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, despite some of the behaviour, despite some of the shenanigans that have been going on. But if you ask yourself this question, why is this happening? If we go back to what Tony Blair said during the last leadership election, I think we can understand what's going on. Tony Blair said, even, and these are his words, even if a traditional left-wing programme provided the path to power, I still wouldn't support it. And I think that gets to the nub of this. Some people are opposed to Jeremy Corbyn because they think that an anti-establishment socialist programme under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership in this post-economic crash, post-banking crash time could succeed. And for them, rather than that being a cause of celebration, that's a cause for concern.
Richard Burgon, MP for Leeds East, Shadow Cabinet Member, Shadow Minister of Justice. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.
Big Georgie Galloway's back on the radio!
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
Now, somebody called Ray Duffy asks, for balance, have you tried to get someone from the coup or Progress to come on tonight on Talk Radio? Ray, you bet we have. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. You should know that. Now, Damien, the legend, in Brighton. Well, Damien, we've been talking about your heartland. First of all, you could have knocked me down with a feather with the news that Labour has 6,000 members in Brighton. And secondly, that they've all been suspended.
Yes, George. It's quite a thing, isn't it? Now, I just wanted to pick up on this because this seems to be eeringly similar to a situation which just took place in the American primaries for the Democratic Party. There was a situation in Nevada where Bernie Sanders supporters were accused of acting violently during a caucus, and those claims were proved to be utter falsehoods. And I think I can act as a witness that the same sort of falsehoods are being levelled at the Brighton and Hove Labour Party membership, George. I'm not quite sure what depth the right wing of the Labour Party are going to sink to in this whole process about their attempt to carry out a coup against Jeremy Corbyn, but it seems that there are no depths that they won't sink to, George.
It looks that way.
Yeah, I mean, falsehoods aside, I mean, you've already covered in great depth the entire premise of the coup is based on a pack of lies.
Yes.
The electability of the
funnily enough, Damien, just like the Iraq War.
It's the modus operandi, George. I mean, they must think people are stupid. They claim that he's not electable when all the evidence proves that the electability of the Labour Party is enhanced under Jeremy Corbyn. And the other thing that I wanted to raise was this issue of Labour Party members who haven't joined in the last 6 months being blocked from voting in the leadership contest. Now, this isn't apartheid South Africa, George. This is the UK, and as a Labour Party member, I expect all my fellow members to be treated equally, and there is no such thing as a second-class citizen in the Labour Party.
Well, in fact, I'm surprised that nobody yet, or at least I haven't read that they have, gone to court to injunct this process, because there's a breach of contract staring you in the face. People were induced on paper to pay a sum of money and told that the rights that they would receive in return included the right to vote in Labour leadership elections.
Exactly.
Without a rule change at the annual conference, that cannot legally, lawfully be changed.
Precisely. Now, let's all stop beating around the bush. Let's do some straight talking on this, George. What's happening is that the right wing of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have been corrupted by corporate interests. Now, just look at their voting records. PFI, austerity, privatisation, these are all policies which are neoliberal concepts which are not in the interests of the electorate, they're in the interests of corporations. Now, that's what's going on. We've got a membership who are aware of that fact, who are not accepting it. We've got a leader in Jeremy Corbyn who is saying, I will place the interests of the public of the UK above corporate interests, and that's what this is all about.
Well, my view, and I was at this Latitude Festival last night. I still can't get the wristband off. And I said to them there, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but I believe that all of you should be. And if there's 6,000 people in Brighton in the Brighton and Hove Labour Party, thousands more should join it. The only way to defeat this anti-democratic coup is by democratic means, and that means people joining. And sooner or later, justice will prevail, I believe. Damien, thanks for the call. Always a pleasure to hear from you. Let's go to Tom in Gloucestershire. Tom.
Hiya, George.
Hi there. Welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm no Labour supporter. I'm not a member, but I'm a keen observer of politics. And I was astounded on Monday listening to Talk Radio when Harriet Harman came on just after Angela Eagle had announced her candidature for the leadership. And she was saying that Jeremy had lost the support of the MPs. He hadn't performed well. The electorate weren't engaged with him and things like this. And I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute.
She's an expert on that, of course, Tom.
Well, when Ed Miliband was
she's
elected,
been the leader and the deputy leader and a leading front bencher as Labour lost election after election after election.
Yeah, well, of course, Ed Miliband didn't have the bulk of the Labour MPs behind him because most of them voted for his brother. But Harriet Harman accepted Ed Miliband. She backed him right the way through to the election. The other thing is Jeremy Corbyn has been democratically elected with the biggest mandate in Labour's history. Gordon Brown took over the Labour leadership, but he wasn't elected as Labour leader, and she turned a blind eye to that. And I thought to myself, this lady's she's clutching at straws when she cited the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was not so suitable as Angela Eagle because of his private school education.
She didn't.
She didn't. She did. On last Monday, I heard her say it.
Oh, my goodness.
She said, Angela Eagle has come up the hard way and we need more people like that in the party. Well, I haven't got a problem with that, but I thought, well, you're clutching at straws now, Harriet. And, of course, the EU referendum is the thing they like to beat him with. Well, Alan Johnson was the leader of the Labour Remain campaign, and nobody talks about him not performing and things like that. The reason why the Labour people didn't vote for the Remain campaign is because Labour under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown turned its back on a lot of its heartlands in South Wales, in the Midlands, in the North East. They opened the door to EU migration. They didn't think it through at all. They just opened the doors. It's caused problems, resentment, beating down people's wages. They didn't build council houses, so there's a big housing crisis now, and they turned their back on manufacturing industry. It halved under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, just as it halved under Mrs. Thatcher. And a lot of the jobs which traditional Labour people used to do disappeared, and Labour did nothing to stem that tide. LDV Vans in Birmingham was a good company. It had good products. The government actually put lots of money into that to develop the Maxus van, which was a good green technology van. But because it had a Russian owner who didn't pay his bills, they just turned a blind eye to it, and 850 people were thrown on the scrap heap. And they had a problem. People haven't given up buying vans. The biggest laugh is, though, George, all of these people who are trying to stab Jeremy, well, they have stabbed Jeremy Corbyn in the back. They are expecting us to vote for them to run the country. How can we trust those people when they do this to their very own people?
Well, it's exactly what a wonderful call, Tom. You and I should have met long ago. We could have done great. We could have done great things together.
But
look,
all parties are coalitions. Jeremy Corbyn is trying to make the Labour Party relevant again. He's trying to sort of focus on these areas which Labour Party under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown turned their backs upon. He's trying to win those very voters they need back through his way. He's also trying to democratise the party again. Under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, it was all done round the coffee table at number 10. They even planned the Iraq war round that coffee table. Now, if these people are serious about being members of the Labour Party, they should be out there arguing their case, they should be taking it to the conference, and they should be putting motions down to be voted on. And then a democratic decision could be reached and policy could be formed. Now, that's the way the Labour Party should be run, with its members, its MPs, its union members, working together and coming up with ideas and policies and voting for them, not this cabal who just took over the Labour Party. And I'm afraid destroyed its reputation forever, in my opinion.
Tom, you should be in Parliament, or at least have a show on Talk Radio. Thanks for that superb, absolutely superb exposition of where we stand. He's right, you know. The New Labour clique enjoyed the 10 richest years in British history, and they didn't fix the roof while the sun was shining. They didn't build many roofs either. They didn't build hardly any houses. They didn't care that hundreds of thousands of British workers were either falling out of employment altogether or had been driven down into 0-hour contract jobs, temporary contracts, not able to be in unions, or if in unions, unable to do anything with that union because of the anti-union Tory laws that New Labour continued. They didn't seem to notice the growing wrath and anger amongst working people as they saw their communities fall apart. I always give the example of Dagenham. In Dagenham, there was a big Ford motor factory where tens of thousands of people worked, and upon whose work hundreds of thousands of people lived. Every one of them had a council house, had a council-provided community centre, had a swimming pool, had public facilities, had a community, had a sense of being together. And this was typical of many working-class communities, including the one in which I myself grew up, that Harriet Harman would never have recognised. And systematically, all of that was destroyed and under a so-called Labour government. And that's before I even mention the war. Now, Anthony Boyle is in Italy, in Cattolica, on holiday with his family, and he says this situation is preposterous. What an embarrassment. He's referring to the Corbyn issue that we have been discussing. Cool Daddy on Twitter says the clique in the Labour HQ seeks to rig the Labour leadership election by defining the electorate. That's absolutely true. A lot of people retweeting what I said about Jeremy Corbyn. Let me just correct it. It wasn't for almost 40 years I sat next to him in Parliament. It was for almost 30 years. And there's hundreds of YouTube videos which show how literally true that was. I don't say that Jeremy Corbyn is Jesus. No man is Jesus. But I say this, he's a lot better leader than Angela Eagle could ever be, or whoever Owen Smith is. I was in Parliament at the same time as him. I wouldn't know him if he was sitting next to me in this studio right now. A quiet man, an unknown man, a man not even a legend in his own Pontypridd household. Or there's that great leader, Angela Eagle. Well, I believe that Jeremy Corbyn will prevail. I believe that he deserves to prevail because he is a good and honest man.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
On Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite!
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio, we'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000, that's the number to call me, George Galloway, on the mother of all talk shows every Friday night between 7 and 10, discussing all the big issues, and we ain't short of them these days. Hit the phones, Jack and Jacqueline.
Controversial conversation and cutting-edge current affairs comment with the notorious B.I.G.G.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
Listen, this guy's a nightmare. He's not a great guy, folks.
I'm determined to get as many calls in as possible because I want to hear the voice of the people. Imran's on the line from Sheffield. Let's hear from him. Imran, welcome.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Thank you. I just want to say, first of all, how much I admire your mastery of political discourse, and I do fear that there'll be never the like of you again. I've got one thing to say about the Nice atrocity, and then one thing also about the Labour Party situation, if time will allow.
Yeah.
About the Nice atrocity, how does it help for Hollande to make a statement about bombing Iraq and Syria when it seems pretty clear that this is exactly the kind of chaos that such lunatic mass murderers want to see mushrooming? I mean, in fact, can such statements perversely encourage such mass murderers from seeking this kind of infamy?
Well, they absolutely do. That's why Hollande's speech last night was so profoundly wrong.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. And the second thing that I wanted to say was about the Labour Party situation. Let's suppose for a dreadful second that the Blairites were successful in bringing Angela Eagle in somehow. Do they genuinely believe in her capabilities as a leader who can fight a general election, or do you think she's a stopgap for them to bring somebody else in when they've had some time to do their mischief?
Well, I think that would make the farcical situation beyond parody. If they put up somebody to defeat Jeremy Corbyn and then put up somebody to defeat the person that defeated Jeremy Corbyn, that would become just a farce, a laughing stock. So no, it's either Jeremy Corbyn leads Labour into the next general election, whenever that is, or somebody called Angela Eagle or somebody called Owen Smith. It's not much. I mean, you don't need to be Einstein to work out what the sensible thing to do in those circumstances are.
Yeah, and they'd make the Labour Party a laughing stock. Is that not something that they would be scared of?
Well,
I mean, judging from Angela's performance on her inaugural speech and subsequently.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just trying to understand from their point of view what they're actually hoping to achieve.
I keep trying to do that myself, Imran, and I really can't. There's only one logic. If they're behaving logically, if they're behaving rationally, there is only one rational explanation, and that is that they intend to leave the Labour Party. They intend to create a new party. So they want to damage the existing Labour Party as much as possible. It cannot be logical or rational to think that you can do all this, and if Jeremy is re-elected, you continue to sit behind him, and you go into a general election asking people to vote for him to be the Prime Minister. That's just not rational. It's not logical. So the impulsion would therefore be, if you fail this year, try again next year, and try again next year. But as you rightly imply there, what does that do to the re-election prospects of all Labour MPs?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I can't understand what their projection is for the future. I mean, yeah, they can try and avoid the Chilcot, the fallout from the Chilcot report and the damning of Blair that so many people rightly want to see. But in the longer term, I don't see any strategy.
No, it's very difficult to see. I don't think they will avoid Chilcot. Angela Eagle, having voted for the war and having voted against the setting up of a Chilcot inquiry, is particularly vulnerable on that. And she seems to think that doesn't matter very much. But I think she's going to learn otherwise. Don't forget my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, coming out soon. Imran, I hope you see it up there in Sheffield. Let's go to Grant in Alloa, Clackmannanshire, if he's still on the line. Grant, welcome to the show.
Hi there, George. Great to be on again.
Thanks, mate. Go ahead.
Now, I've got a couple of points, George, and I've wrote them down this time because last time I couldn't really articulate it. But first of all, I was wanting to talk about the people that are actually plotting this coup. Now, I done my homework last night. I was looking on the Electoral Commission website, and you look at the people donating to Progress and donating to the likes of your Dan Jarvises and Yvette Coopers, and you're seeing the multi-million-pound investors.
Or Tom Watson. Tom Watson got a £200,000 donation from Max Mosley, the former head of Formula One.
I think that shows the key differences between the two sides in this coup. There's Jeremy Corbyn represents the interests of the people. These plotters represent the interests of the multi-million-pound investors, and I think there is something severely wrong with that, the type of people within the Labour Party. I was also looking to talk about Owen Smith, and George, I know you I hope you agree with me on this, but any man of principle kind of sticks to people who gave them everything, basically, and I'm referring to Owen Smith, obviously, at this year's Scottish Labour conference. He actually said that he owed everything to Jeremy Corbyn.
Did he really?
Yeah, he owed everything to Jeremy Corbyn. I think that's
send me a link. Send me a link on that, Grant. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I mean, anybody, I know, for instance, if I owed everything to somebody, I certainly wouldn't stab them in the back the way that he did.
Well, he wasn't in Parliament when the Iraq War happened. He came in 2010, so that means I spent 3 years in the same Parliament as him between 2012 and 2015, and I have no idea who he is. I've never set eyes on him in my life until this last week. I have never heard his voice, which was hauntingly reminiscent of Neil Kinnock's, I must say, until this week. So I know nothing about him. What I do know is that although he wasn't in Parliament at the time of the war, he was a special advisor to a Labour minister, Paul Murphy, who was one of the strongest supporters of the war. So it's really for Owen Smith to show us some evidence that he ever said, wrote, or did anything against the Iraq War. Until he does, I simply won't believe that he was other than a supporter of it. Now, I'm not, it's not that I'm monomaniacal or obsessed about this war. I'm obsessed about the reverberations more than a decade later, which are still being played out, not just in Iraq and Syria and Libya and Yemen and elsewhere in the Arab world, but on the streets of European capitals. And who knows, maybe one day on our own streets. It's not that long ago, I think a week or two, perhaps a week, just over a week, the 10th anniversary of 7/7. We're all still paying a price for a war that these people supported. And yet they want us to vote for them and keep them in leadership positions. It's about time, frankly, that they accepted defeat and shuffled off.
Yeah, I mean, George, I generally just think that they've picked the most left-leaning MP to stand up against Jeremy, and I generally do think it will be Owen Smith against Jeremy. I don't think Angela Eagle's a credible candidate whatsoever. Again, Owen Smith it kind of strikes me as a quiet, evil plotter in the background, because there's apparently rumours that people were approached about Owen Smith being a leader 6 months ago.
Well, he said so himself, and John Mann said so. Hardly a friend of Jeremy Corbyn. He said that Owen Smith approached him 6 months ago about running against Corbyn for leadership. And even John Mann said, no thanks.
Yeah, what scares me the most about the kind of Owen Smith is people were actually painting him at this kind of, I go back to the Scottish Labour Conference, they were painting him as kind of one of the Corbynistas. It seems like such a tragic turn, if I'm being honest. I was actually quite gutted to see him resigned to the shadow cabinet. I actually thought he was one of the left-wingers. But now, as I mentioned to his comments, I think he's really showed his true colours in the past few months. I don't see how anybody in the Labour Party could trust him, especially if anybody does go and look at the Scottish Labour conference.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look at that. But the facts are, Grant, nobody's going to defeat Jeremy Corbyn unless they rig it. Unless the Blairites rig the election by excluding, and they have now begun to try and exclude, hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands. If they rig it, they could defeat Corbyn. But what kind of a victory would that be? It would be a Pyrrhic victory that would leave them utterly discredited, leave hundreds of thousands of Corbyn supporters cascading around the political system. And how would that profit Labour? It's just incredible.
I think they'd be happy to be represented by spoiled ballot paper, if I'm being honest, George. I think they're them type of people. They don't want a democratic election because, as you just kind of mentioned there, we will win this. We will win this battle. But I don't know what. I hope that they do go away to the Liberal Democrats. If I'm being honest, George, I think we could get 100 new MPs that are highly supportive and represent the membership, because I don't think these MPs do represent the membership whatsoever.
OK, Grant in Alloa, thanks very much for the call. Talk Radio's David Spencer with some breaking news.
George, we're hearing some extraordinary reports coming in from Turkey in the last few minutes. The Reuters news agency among those sending in details where gunshots have been heard in the capital, Ankara. We're also getting witness statements that military jets and helicopters have been flying overhead. And we understand the main bridges across the Bosphorus have been closed off by the military. And we've had a statement in the last few minutes from the leaders in Turkey to say the military has been taking action without authority. So just to repeat that, gunshots in the capital, Ankara, jets seen overhead, helicopters in the sky, and obviously that means a very, very difficult political situation in Turkey.
A very, very dramatic news bulletin, David. That seems like a military coup against President Erdogan, who used to be the Prime Minister, became the President, has assumed more and more sultanic powers. And the military, it has long been rumoured and suspected, we're not going to put up with this unlimited accretion of powers by Erdogan. Give me the timescale again, David. When did this break?
Well, we're hearing this in the last sort of half hour or so of reports, these eyewitness reports certainly, and the details coming in from Reuters literally in the last few minutes. We've got other confirmation of those kind of eyewitness reports from other news agencies. Interestingly, one of I think the Turkish Prime Minister was interviewed by the BBC this week, where he was very open about the approach to Britain and how the rhetoric about Turkey during the referendum campaign, which was extremely negative from both sides, actually, the out and the stay campaign, and this kind of air of quite cool authority that he was trying to put across from Turkey, which is obviously, from these indications, very much not the case.
Well, you see, Erdogan had several very good years. He built a very successful economy. Their growth rate was higher than China for several years. And they had a foreign policy of no conflict with the neighbours. Now they have a conflict with all their neighbours. They have a conflict with Syria, they have a conflict with Iraq, and they have turned into a civil war against the Kurdish minority within Turkey. So it has all been falling apart, and the more it fell apart, the more power Erdogan took unto himself. And this may be the end of Erdogan. Keep us posted, David, will you?
I'll keep you across it, yeah.
I really appreciate that. I have a particularly close interest in what's happening in Turkey. That was David Spencer, Talk Radio's newsman, with some very, very dramatic news indeed. If you have any opinions on it, by all means call me with them. The number is 0844 499 1000, or you can text us. Just text TALK, then your message to 87222, though that will cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. You can also tweet at Talk Radio. You can tweet at George Galloway, of course. So I'm taking your calls, and I am reading such messages as are fit to read. James Ball, Civil War in Turkey, truly terrifying. And some of these just can't be read, I'm afraid. Let me just press on air and refresh them. Truthseeker says it's only a matter of time before us in the UK get a taste of what is happening in France. Well, I pray that that is not so, but the reality is our threat assessment is severe. Severe is defined as a terrorist attack being highly likely. It's only logical to believe that it is highly likely. After all, we have been involved in all the wars that France has, plus some. France didn't join the attack and occupation of Iraq, but it has been bombing Syria, and it did bomb Libya in a frenzied attack on Libya, alongside us in Britain. So the reality is there's a very clear and present danger of Britain coming under attack, and I'm not convinced that we have the wherewithal to first resist it, and if we can't, to then gun it down as quickly as possible.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you right back. And you've got just over half an hour left to speak to me tonight, though I'm here every Friday night between 7 and 10. And don't forget, if you've missed any of the show or you want to hear it again, then go to the website at talksport.co.uk. Sorry, Talk Radio. What a blunder. Luckily, my wizard producer, Edward, is on the ball. Talkradio.co.uk. Old habits die hard. You can go there and you can download the podcast, which I think might be an interesting thing to do, because as David Spencer, our newsman, broke into the show to tell us, there seems to be a full-scale military coup underway in Turkey. Jets and military helicopters are firing on government buildings in Ankara. There are tanks outside Istanbul's Ataturk airport, and Erdogan and the Prime Minister have both said that unauthorized military action is underway. Now, it remains to be seen whether the military will go over to the side of the coup and take power. It remains to be seen what Erdogan's millions of supporters will do about it. Will they come onto the street in defense of the president, whose AKP party is very popular? It's very unpopular too amongst at least half of the Turkish population, but it's very popular indeed amongst the other half. The military has never been sold on the idea of the AKP, an Islamic party. It has never liked Erdogan's steady accretion of power, becoming first the Prime Minister, then changing the constitution to make the presidency an executive presidency, and then to go for the presidency. They haven't liked how he has disposed of Prime Minister after Prime Minister and taken more and more power unto himself. But this is not a done deal, I would think. First of all of the armed forces will have to remain loyal to the coup. If some of them remain loyal to the government, the elected government, much as I myself dislike it, then you've got a civil war in Turkey on top of the civil war that there already is in Turkey between the Erdogan regime and the Kurdish minority. If all of the military go over to the coup, that raises the question of a mass movement of Erdogan's supporters moving onto the streets and having to be confronted by the military, which could be very, very bloody and messy indeed. So, if you want to call me, 0844 499 1000, Scott has, and he's up next. Scott, welcome.
Hi there, George. Nice to speak to you.
Where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Erskine, just outside Glasgow.
I know it well. Go ahead.
Stuff. It was just about the terrorist attacks and stuff that we watch, and it becomes very, very tiresome. And it's just that when you watch the politicians throughout the countries in Europe or wherever it is that is being bombed or people being run over, they seem to talk about a reaction to what's happened, and it's always, let's bomb them, let's do this, let's do that.
Bomb a lot of them.
Sorry, George?
Bomb a lot of them. That's the mentality.
This seems to be the attitude that they have. But in my personal opinion, the mindset, and it's a very, very hard thing. We're never going to the land of milk and honey. I realise that. But the mindset of people have to change. There has to be a cultural evolution in the brain, because to me, it's like the world just now is make weapons, sell weapons, bomb countries for profit, for gain, and people are getting wiped out left, right, and centre. You know, the people. I sit and I despair, George. I despair so much. Sometimes I don't know if my heart just gets so heavy. I've watched videos of kids videos that you wouldn't see on mainstream media. You have to go to YouTube, and oh my goodness gracious, the sights, George, I have seen. And
that's very, very, very powerfully put, Scott. Your line's beginning to break down there. No, it's okay. It's very, very powerfully put and a very powerful message.
What is there one other point, if I can make it, George?
If I can hear you, go ahead.
Sorry, George.
No, I'm afraid we'll have to close that, Scott, because the line isn't good enough. Dramatic events happening every day now. Nobody could have predicted what happened in Nice yesterday, and nobody could have predicted what seems to be happening in Turkey right now. And there'll be concern, of course, and we'll try and update you if we get anything on that. There'll be concern about the fact that Turkey is still a very big tourist destination for British people and for people all over the world. I wouldn't myself now go there for a holiday because I wouldn't be welcome if I did. But many British people go there, and you'll be brought up to date, kept up to date by Talk Radio in the course of the rest of the evening, not just on my show, but as news continues to come in. This is the mother of all talk shows, with me, George Galloway, every Friday night between 7 and 10.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
Don't forget, Ian Lee's up after me at 10 o'clock. A great broadcaster, actually, well worth staying tuned for. And tomorrow morning, from 8, Penny Smith's Saturday Breakfast Show features the woman who owes her son's freedom to Theresa May, and someone who injects snake venom into himself. This alongside all the usual fun, including our book club, life hacks, and how to do a proper barbecue with our top chef, Barry Vera. That's all tomorrow from 8 a.m. only on Talk Radio. Now, it's been a busy week in the political sphere, so let's have a more light-hearted look at it. Cartoonist, terrific cartoonist, Tim Sanders, must be, as all cartoonists must, able to see the absurd in all of it. Tim, I'm guessing you're not going to let me down. You can see the absurd in it.
Well, has been, I don't know, really. I haven't noticed anything going on at all, really. What's been happening then, George?
What does a cartoonist make of, say, Angela Eagle?
Well, Angela Eagle, she's quite tricky, actually, along with some other people in her camp, because they're so kind of nondescript, really. They're sort of a bit dull to look at, and they don't say anything very interesting, or what they do say that's interesting is only only interesting because of the people they upset. But it's not. They don't say anything new, or they don't say anything that makes you think particularly. Just makes you a bit annoyed, really. So
what about Theresa May now? When Mrs. Thatcher made way for John Major, it really was from major to minor.
Yes.
What about from Cameron to Theresa? What do you think the cartoonists will make of her?
Well, she's great to draw. You have to say that for her. I mean,
yeah,
she's fantastic.
Statuesque.
Yes, and that face, those expressions. She's almost as a bit Farage-like, a bit Farage-ish. Those sort of mugging faces and stuff, which are really great for drawing. I mean, you have to be careful with that as well, because you don't want to present her as, you don't want to say this is an ugly woman or anything like that. So it's very difficult. But it's fun. She is quite fun, really, but terrifying.
Boris
not
is
as terrifying as I mean. There's 4 words that occur to me that are really terrifying in the recent events, which is the 4 words are Boris Johnson, foreign secretary. That is a really frightening combination of words.
It is, but it keeps us in business.
That's true.
We're never going to go out of business.
No.
He must be a cartoonist's dream, no?
Oh, he's fantastic, isn't he? He is one. I met him once, actually, as a cartoonist. He was all very hail fellow and well met, oh, well, bravo, cartoonist. I mean, he is fantastic.
He is actually like a cartoon figure.
He is.
I mean, he's more like a cartoon figure than a real man. You could see him with Lord Snooty, couldn't you?
Yeah, or Billy Bunter. I mean, I think he's Billy Bunter, really. I think that's the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's not just his, how shall we call it, orotund oratory and his rotund physical form. It's that hair.
Yeah.
You've got to work hard to have a hairstyle like that.
I have heard from reliable sources that as he goes into meetings, he ruffles his hair beforehand. It's quite
that must be true, unless, of course, he's into some hurly-burly on the chaise longue. But heaven forfend, he would never do that, would he?
No, I don't think. I think that's very, very unlikely. Having said that, I mean, he's. No, I was going to make a rude joke then, but I better not, because it's his radio, isn't it? So it was something about what he's done to quite a lot of people in the past. He's about to do to the rest of the world, I think, as foreign secretary.
Well, it's a bit like making Prince Philip the foreign secretary, isn't it?
It's very similar, actually. I think he's going to do a similar role, because he'll go around shaking people's hands and being all jolly and hail fellow.
Yeah, shaking people's hands and insulting them.
Yes. Yes.
Asking them about their slitty eyes or their pickaninnies or their watermelon smiles or all the...
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, there's hardly a racial group or a country in the world that Boris Johnson hasn't been very well paid for insulting.
That's his problem, isn't it? Because it leaves him with very few countries left to offend. I mean, that is... maybe you'll have to go back and re-offend some other ones.
There's only 10 countries in the world that Britain hasn't invaded yet.
Wow.
So Boris Johnson, there can't be 10 countries that he hasn't insulted yet.
No, and maybe he could just skip the insulting phase and go straight to invading them.
Straight for the invading.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Who else on the political scene is, I mean, I know Steve Bell's a good friend of mine from The Guardian, who's a very good cartoonist too.
Yes, he's a friend of mine too.
Are we living in a slightly bland era for the cartoonist?
Well, no, I don't think so. Not now. I mean, it's the last 2 weeks. No, the last 2 months, I suppose. Really, they've been like 40 years, and we've waited 40 years for an event like for every day. Someone either resigns or stands to oppose the leader, or it's extraordinary. I mean, things happen by the minute, really. I mean, I've been close to a heart attack several times this week. I think your hopes are lifted, and then they're dashed, and then lifted again, and they're dashed, and then there's things to laugh at, and there's things to cry at. It's very, very entertaining at the moment. I think.
Yeah, although I suppose I was thinking of George Osborne's way going and replaced by Eric Hammond, who's basically a Dalek. Maybe you could draw him as a Dalek.
Yeah, or a Cyberman, perhaps. Staying on the, because we've done Daleks a few times now. But you're something like he's a kind of I speak your weight sort of thing, isn't he?
Yes, speak your weight machine. Absolutely, yeah absolutely. Yeah. Well, neither of us is going to go out of business because it is a fast-moving scene. Until half an hour ago, you would have thought the president of Turkey was becoming the Sultan and the king of all he surveyed, and now he's probably going to be under arrest in the back of a tank by the end of the evening.
I saw they're claiming it's not a coup. It's a I suppose it's the same way. It's not a coup in the same way as the what's going on in the Labour Party isn't a coup either.
It's not a coup, except the military jets and helicopters are bombing the government's headquarters, and there's tanks outside Ataturk Airport. Well, Tim, thank you very much indeed. You have enlightened us, enlivened our appreciation of the political scene. That's Tim.
Thank you, George.
Tim Sanders, a master cartoonist for many, many newspapers, telling us that actually it's not that bland, that Theresa May is maybe not as cartoonable as David Cameron, but nonetheless good to draw, a very tall lady with a very expressive face. Boris Johnson, no doubt a cartoonist's dream. I thought he was kind of Lord Snooty, but Tim thought he was more Billy Bunter. Maybe he's a mixture of them both. So here is Talk Radio's David Spencer, who's got the latest from Turkey, because it's all going off there, isn't it?
Yeah, that was what I was going to write in my script, but I thought I'd better not describe it as that way, but it is very much all going off. You're experienced enough, no, George, that the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing right now really means that there's a military coup, because the politicians, the Prime Minister in Turkey is saying there have been some attempts by some parts of the military to take control, but the government, very much the elected government, the language coming from Ankara, says we are still in control. The military think very much the other way. And we're very much used to how this tends to play out in these situations. There are tanks on the streets.
The military usually wins, I'm sorry to say.
The military usually wins. There are tanks on the streets of Ankara. There are planes in the sky, helicopters in the sky. And we think that obviously this military coup, as you mentioned earlier, when we got this breaking news from the likes of Reuters in the last hour, this is pretty much how it would play out. Unrest amongst the military for a while, and they've been waiting for a moment. And
Erdogan jailed a lot of generals, you know, but recently, because he made the turn against the Kurdish people, he released a lot of these generals from jail.
And the military unhappy with some of, obviously, fighting on those different fronts. They've also had very poor relations with Russia in the last year for obviously the incident of shooting down a Russian fighter plane. So all of that unrest, they would have been biding their time. They've chosen this day to make their move in Ankara. There are also reports from Istanbul as well, obviously, the second city. So
Any sign of people coming out onto the street in defence of the regime?
The pictures yet are unusually in these circumstances. You've got pictures of maybe shopping centres or something that looks unusually calm while we expect to see the tanks moving in the background. No pictures yet of a sort of move from the people. I'd imagine that will slowly happen over the next few hours. Again, you're used to how this might actually play out and whether people feel comfortable, and then once the military has taken control like that, then there is a sense of maybe if there is going to be a reaction that is positive to what is happening, because there's a lot of frustration amongst citizens as well as the military of what's
very much so. I mean, half the country really likes Erdogan and half the country really hates him, but crucially for him, the military doesn't like him either. Thanks very much. David Spencer will keep you updated with the latest from Turkey. I've got a few minutes to take some calls. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. The mother of all talk shows.
Listener comrades of the world, unite! The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
Well, the Turkish military say they have taken over, and the Turkish government, the elected government, say a part of the military has staged a military coup. We'll keep you updated, of course, throughout the night on what the situation is in Turkey. The Turkish military have taken power before, of course. In my lifetime, there have been at least two prolonged periods of military dictatorship in Turkey, and no good came of it. I have no time at all for Erdogan, the president of Turkey, no time at all for his regime, but I have even less time for military coups. That's my point of view. Maybe Ray in Tonopandi, in the Rhondda, has a different point of view, or he may be phoning up about something entirely different. Ray, welcome to the show.
It's Ray from Pontypridd. I have spoke to you before when you was on TalkSport, George.
I remember you very well, my dear. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, George. How are you?
Yes, good. I was almost the MP for Tonopandi, of course, a long time ago, more than 30 years ago.
I say, sorry, George, can I
go
say
ahead.
first about the sad passing of Carl from Plastow, a hugely principled man like your good self.
I was very sad, and I was at his funeral. I spoke at his funeral, and his family gave me a portrait of Carl, which is on my wall at home. He's much missed, and he'll never be forgotten.
A lovely man.
Yeah, he'll never be forgotten. But
What
you're another legend, and you're calling up, I'm glad to say.
Thank you, George. What I'd like to say, George, given Britain and America's recent and past history around the world, I got a litany of things they've been, accused of and have done over the years. Empire, Guantanamo Bay, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, slavery. Why do they keep on banging about our values?
Yes, what are these values?
That's what I'd like to know, George. You know what I mean?
When you ask them that, they say such platitudes.
Yes.
Of course, they say, for example, like fair play. Well, are the Danish people not in favour of fair play? What's British about fair play? Yeah. There's not much fair play going on in the Labour Party right now.
Oh, good. Hey, George, they've done everything to Jeremy Corbyn, and he stood up to it really bravely. You know what I mean? He's been
to be honest, I misunderestimated him, as George Bush might put it. I did not see him as the man of steel that he has proved to be. I did not think that this whole operation, it's a full court press, Ray. It's the state broadcaster. It's the overwhelming part of the private sector media. It's the vast majority of his own MPs. It's the former leaders. It's everybody.
They don't like socialism, see, George.
Well, that's what they're really afraid of, because imagine if Jeremy were to be elected and he were to implement the kind of policies on which he has been elected. Everything in Britain would change, and the losers would be the people with wealth and power.
We were three times as much more in debt in 1945, and look what the Labour government done then, and we could do it again.
Exactly, and the 10 years that Tony Blair was in power, the 10 richest years we've ever had, and the 10 years of the biggest parliamentary majorities that Labour ever had. And what did they do with it? How did they change life for the mass of the people in the Rhondda?
Yes,
Scarcely at all.
These villages, George, are crumbling. And they were crumbling in them 10 richest years. Nothing changed for us. Now they got the excuse they can't spend the money because it's austerity.
Yeah, exactly. And the industrial wasteland that they left behind in the Rhondda, in South Wales, in South Yorkshire, in the northeast, in the northwest, they have left a desert.
They have, George. And it is really great. Nice speaking to you anyway, George.
And you, Ray, it's fantastic. I'm so happy it's you. I saw just Ray and Tony
I'm glad you were back on the radio, giving the voice to the voiceless.
Thank you so much, Ray. I appreciate that. Well, there's no shortage of issues, of course. We are discussing the Labour civil war. We have been discussing the extraordinary atrocity that took place in Nice, in the Riviera, in south of France, last evening. And this evening, we've got a full-scale military coup going on in Turkey. Let me summarize that last point for you. The Turkish military says, and I quote them, that they have taken over. I would have thought that the Turkish military means what it says and says what it means. The dictatorship that they had in the past in Turkey was a deeply negative experience. All kinds of deep state torture and crimes were committed under the cover of military dictatorship in Turkey. I am wholly opposed to a Turkish military coup, and I want to make that clear for the avoidance of doubt. But the Erdogan regime has been pushing the envelope with Turkish civil society and the Turkish military remorselessly year after year, and it would appear that they have finally gone too far, that the military at least have decided to seize power. It remains to be seen, and I have to acknowledge, though I have no time for the regime in Turkey, I have to acknowledge that millions of Turkish people do, and they have voted for Erdogan time and time and time again. They have supported the change in the Turkish constitution that created an executive presidency. They have voted his government back in. I don't know how many elections he's won, but it's plenty of elections. Will the people accept this military coup? The economic performance of the Erdogan regime was for many years highly successful, and he looked as if he had found the formula to mix Islamic government with economic prosperity and growth. For a considerable period of time, the Turkish economy was growing faster than even China, and that is saying something. For a period of time, Erdogan seemed to be on the way through a peace process to a solution of the Kurdish-Turkish conundrum. How a very significant minority of Kurdish people within the Turkish state could coexist in relative harmony with peace and democracy guaranteed on both sides. He seemed to have that underway. He had a foreign policy which said, Davutoglu was the foreign minister who expressed it, no quarrels with the neighbors, no quarrel with Greece, no quarrel with Syria, no quarrel with the Iraq, and it seemed like that approach was working. But now Turkey has a quarrel with all of its neighbors. It has not resolved the conflict with Greece over the illegal invasion and occupation of northern Cyprus and the partitioning of the island. It, far from having resolved the Kurdish question, has embarked upon yet another attempt to solve it by military means. And you cannot, be at the one and the same time an applicant for membership of the European Union whilst at war, I mean literally at war, with tanks and aeroplanes and guns and soldiers, with a substantial section of your own people. And that is what has been happening between the Turkish state and the Kurdish minority over the last couple of years. And of course, its role in Syria, in opening the gates for the ISIS, Al-Qaeda insurgency in the north. They've not been alone in that, of course. They have been in very rum company in that, of course, including our own country and many, many others. But their complicity in the growth of this monstrosity called ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria on the basis that my enemy's enemy is my friend, my enemy being the Syrian regime, so if he has an enemy, I'll support them, even if the enemy is worse than him, is a profoundly misjudged policy. And that may have been the reason for this military coup that is now taking place in Turkey. The state TV has been stormed by the military. There are helicopters and jets flying over Ankara and firing. There are tanks at the Ataturk airport. And of course, lastly, but not least, the dangerous, reckless confrontation with Russia that Turkey under Erdogan has embarked upon is filled with danger for the Turkish military. Russia and Turkey are neighbors. The Russians are trying to crush Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria, no doubt for their own reasons, but that's what they're trying to do. And the Turkish military has clearly taken it askance that their government is on the other side, and moreover, requiring them to shoot down Russian military aircraft and put them on a potential war footing between Turkey and Russia. So, where does NATO stand on this? Turkey is a member of NATO. It was, to some extent, doing the bidding of NATO in Cyprus. What's going to happen in the next hour, in the next day, in the next week, in Turkey, in the big international issues that we've been talking about this evening? What's going to happen in the conflict in the Labour Party? What's going to happen? How many more dramatic and remarkable developments are we going to see breaking on our phones, on our TV screens, on the radio? It is the most extraordinary of times. And I'm glad I have this platform here on Talk Radio with the mother of all talk shows to excoriate, to explain, to agitate, and to educate. It's been marvellous. See you next week.